The first time my mother-in-law laughed and asked when I was getting a real job, it wasn't even said with malice. That was the part that stuck with me. It came out light, almost playful, like a joke everyone else was supposed to chuckle at and move on from. We were sitting around her long dining table, plates still warm, glasses half full. That familiar post-dinner haze where people feel comfortable enough to say things they'd normally keep to themselves. She smiled when she said it, looked straight at me, and waited just long enough for the room to notice. I remember shrugging, smiling back, and letting the conversation drift somewhere else. On the outside, it probably looked like I didn't care. On the inside, something small and sharp settled into place. I'm Omar. I'm 32, and I've learned over the years that silence often says more than arguing ever could. If you'd asked my wife, Lena, she would have told you that her family has always been like that. Loud opinions, casual comments, lots of laughter that sometimes lands a little too close to the bone. They pride themselves on honesty, the kind that doesn't stop to ask whether it's necessary or kind. Growing up, Lena learned to deflect it with humor. I learned to endure it with patience. At least, that's what I told myself. That dinner wasn't the first time my work had come up, but it was the first time it had been reduced to a punchline in front of everyone. Lena's father had already gone through his usual routine earlier in the evening, explaining to a cousin how stable his engineering job was, how predictable his hours were, how nice it felt to know exactly what was coming every month. Lena's sister chimed in about her promotion at the hospital, the long shifts, the stress, the sense of purpose. Then someone turned to me and asked casually, "So what exactly do you do again?" I gave my usual answer. I work for myself. I consult. I build things online. I keep it vague because vague is easier. Vague doesn't invite follow-up questions that feel like cross-examinations. Vague doesn't sound like bragging or defensiveness. It just sounds temporary. And temporary, in their minds, meant not quite real. My mother-in-law tilted her head, fork resting against her plate, and laughed. "That's nice," she said. "But seriously, Omar, when are you getting a real job?" She glanced around the table, as if inviting everyone else in on the joke, then added, "You know, something with benefits. Something stable." There it was. Light. Harmless. Wrapped in a smile. Everyone laughed politely. A couple of people nodded. Someone said, "Yeah, the economy's tough right now." Lena shot me a quick look, the kind that says, "I'm sorry," without actually saying it. I shrugged, smiled, and said, "We'll see." Then I asked her uncle about a renovation project he'd mentioned earlier, and just like that, the moment passed. But it didn't really pass. It just sank deeper. I didn't grow up dreaming of approval from people who measured worth by job titles, but that doesn't mean it didn't sting. I've spent years building what I have. Long nights, quiet mornings, risks that didn't look impressive until they worked. My days don't look like theirs. There's no uniform, no office gossip, no predictable ladder to climb. To them, that meant I was floating, unanchored, waiting for adulthood to begin. Lena and I talked about it on the drive home. She apologized, again, for her mother's comment. I told her it was fine. And it was, in the sense that I wasn't going to start a family argument over a single sentence. But I also told her something else, something I hadn't fully admitted to myself yet. I told her I wasn't going to correct them. Not now. Not later. If they wanted to think I was drifting, that was their choice. She looked at me carefully, the way she does when she's trying to read between my words. "Are you sure?" she asked. "You don't have to prove anything to them." "I know," I said. And I meant it. At least, I thought I did. Over the next few months, the comments didn't stop. They just changed shape. At birthdays, someone would ask if I'd found anything steady yet. At holidays, my mother-in-law would ask Lena, not me, whether we were worried about the future. There was always a laugh attached, always a quick pivot to another topic, like the words themselves weren't meant to linger. But they did. They stacked up quietly, each one reinforcing the same unspoken narrative. I was being tolerated, not respected. What bothered me most wasn't the judgment. It was the assumption, the idea that because my work didn't look familiar, it must not be serious. Because I didn't complain about stress, I must not be working hard. Because I didn't talk about money, there must not be much of it. I started noticing how often money came up around them. Not numbers, not specifics, just comparisons. Who bought what? Who upgraded their car? Who was doing well? Lena's sister loved to drop hints about bonuses. Her parents talked openly about pensions and retirement plans. When Lena and I stayed quiet, It filled the space with its own meaning. Still, I said nothing. I let it be. Tax season came around quietly, the way it always does for me. It's never been something I dread or celebrate. Just another process, another reminder of the scale of things I've built piece by piece. One afternoon, a thick envelope arrived in the mail, official looking, my name printed clearly across the front. I left it on the counter, planning to deal with it later. We were supposed to visit Lena's parents that weekend. I didn't think anything of it when Lena gathered the mail before we left, stacking it neatly to open later. I didn't think anything of it when her mother insisted on tidying up the kitchen after lunch, moving papers, wiping counters, humming to herself. I didn't think anything of it until I heard her voice change. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was just quiet enough to notice. A pause where there shouldn't have been one. "Omar," she called out from the kitchen, holding something in her hand. I looked up from the couch and saw the envelope. My envelope. Opened. And for the first time since that dinner months ago, I felt something shift, not in the room, but in the balance between us. When she said my name from the kitchen, it didn't sound accusatory. It sounded uncertain. That alone was enough to make my stomach tighten. I stood up slowly, already knowing that whatever she'd seen had crossed some invisible line. Lena followed me, her expression confused, then concerned when she noticed the envelope in her mother's hand. It was folded now, not neatly, but hastily, like someone who'd opened something they weren't supposed to and didn't quite know how to put it back together again. "This came with the rest of the mail," her mother said, eyes flicking between Lena and me. "I didn't realize it wasn't ours. I thought it was, well, never mind." She gave a small laugh that didn't land. "It's just taxes, right?" I nodded. "Yes." There was a pause. A longer one this time. Her eyes went back to the paper, then to my face, then away again. She handed it to me without another word and turned back to the sink, scrubbing a plate that was already clean. Lena looked at me, silently asking if I was okay. I smiled and nodded again, even though something in my chest had started to hum, low and uncomfortable. The rest of the visit passed in a strange fog. Her mother was quieter than usual. Her father avoided eye contact. Lena's sister kept talking, filling the space with stories about work and schedules and stress, oblivious or pretending to be. Every now and then, I'd catch her mother glancing at me, like she was seeing a stranger in a familiar chair. On the drive home, Lena finally spoke. "She opened it, didn't she?" "Yes," I said. "She shouldn't have." "I know. She didn't say anything to you?" "Not really." Lena was quiet for a long moment. Then, softly, "What did it say?" I thought about it. About the numbers. About how small they'd look to me on the page. Just another year. Another confirmation that I was exactly where I'd planned to be. "Enough," I said. And that was the truth. I thought that would be the end of it. An awkward moment. A private realization on her mother's part. Maybe a shift in tone going forward. What I didn't expect was how quickly embarrassment would curdle into something sharper. The next family dinner was a few weeks later. Same table. Same plates. Same routine. Only this time, the atmosphere felt tighter, like everyone was bracing for something without knowing exactly what. Her mother was overly attentive at first, asking if I wanted more food, if I was comfortable, if I was working too hard lately. It was such a sudden change that it almost felt like mockery, even though her voice was sweet. Lena noticed it too. She kept glancing at me, eyebrows slightly raised. Then the comments started again. Only now, they were different. "So," her mother said at one point, stirring her tea, "this consulting thing you do, it must be very demanding." "It has its moments," I replied. "And it's reliable?" she asked. "I mean, you never really know with those kinds of things. One you're good, one you're not so good, right?" There it was. The shift. Not curiosity. Concern. The kind that pretends to be helpful while quietly questioning your right to sit at the table. "I manage," I said. She nodded, lips pressed together. "Of course. I just worry about Lena. About stability. About the future. You know how it is." Lena put her fork down. "Mom, I'm just saying," her mother continued quickly. "It's different when you have a real structure. A company behind you. Protections. You can't build a life on something that could disappear." I met her eyes. Calmly. "It hasn't disappeared yet." Her father cleared his throat, but said nothing. After that dinner, the phone call started. Not to me. To Lena. Always framed as concern. Was I stressed? Was I overwhelmed? Did I seem distracted? Had we talked about long-term plans? Lena would shut it down every time, but I could hear the tension in her voice afterward, the way it lingered even after she hung up. Then came the comparisons. Lena's sister announced she was buying a new car. Her parents praised her for being responsible and forward-thinking. Her brother-in-law joked about how nice it was to have guaranteed income. Someone glanced at me when he said it. I laughed. Quietly. Let it slide. Again. The breaking point didn't come all at once. It crept in through small exclusions. A family outing planned without asking if we were free. A decision made under the assumption that we probably wouldn't want to spend the money. Lena noticed it before I did. Or maybe I noticed and didn't want to name it yet. One night, Lena came home pale and tight-lipped. She dropped her bag by the door and sat down heavily on the couch. What happened? I asked. She hesitated. I had lunch with my mom today. I waited. She asked me if I'd thought about protecting myself. Legally. I felt my chest tighten. Protecting yourself from what? She swallowed. From you. The word hung there between us. She said that if anything went wrong, if your work dried up, if something happened, I'd be the one carrying the burden. That I should think about separating finances. Just in case. I stared at the wall for a moment, letting the anger rise and settle into something colder. And you? I told her no, Lena said quickly. I told her she was out of line. She said she was just being a good mother. Of course she did. After that, the tone shifted again. Now it wasn't just concern. It was strategy. Lena's parents started inviting her to things without me. Just quick coffees. Errands. Girl time. Lena pushed back, but the message was clear. They wanted access to her without me present. Then came the dinner invitation that finally snapped something inside me. It was supposed to be a small family gathering. Just immediate relatives. Lena and I arrived a little late. Traffic worse than expected. As we walked in, conversation stopped for just a second too long. We sat. Plates were served. And then her mother smiled and said, "We had a little discussion earlier." Lena stiffened beside me. About what? About planning, her mother said. About the future. Her father nodded. We were thinking it might be wise for Lena to have a safety net. Independent savings. Something that's hers. I felt the room tilt slightly. She does, I said evenly. Her mother waved a hand. You know what I mean. Something untouched. Separate. Lena looked between them. Why are you talking about this like I'm not here? We're talking because you are here, her mother said. Because we love you. I finally spoke again. And what exactly are you suggesting? Her mother took a breath. We're suggesting that until Omar's situation is more traditional, it might be smart to keep certain things protected. Just in case. There it was. Not a joke. Not a laugh. A line drawn. I looked at Lena. She was shaking now, not visibly, but I could feel it through the way her hand clenched in her lap. We're leaving, she said. Her mother frowned. Don't be dramatic. Lena stood. You don't get to talk about my husband like he's a liability. Her father finally spoke. Sit down. Let's be reasonable. I stood too. The room buzzed with discomfort, but no one stopped us. As we walked out, her mother said something that cut deeper than anything else she'd said before. We're just trying to help you before it's too late. In the car, Lena broke down. Not loud. Just tears sliding silently down her face as she stared out the window. I'm sorry, she whispered. I didn't think it would get this bad. I took her hand. Neither did I. That night, something changed. Not in my anger, but in my clarity. This wasn't about misunderstanding anymore. It was about control. About deciding who was worthy and who wasn't, and trying to rearrange our lives to fit their comfort. And then, a few days later, Lena got a call from her sister. I didn't know how to tell you, she said, voice tight. Mom and Dad asked me to talk to you. About what? Lena asked. There was a pause. About convincing you to think independently. About maybe staying with them for a while. Just to have space. To think things through. Lena went very quiet. They think, her sister continued carefully, that if you weren't around Omar so much, you might see things more clearly. When Lena hung up, she looked at me with a mix of disbelief and hurt I'd never seen before. They're trying to separate us, she said. That was the moment it stopped being uncomfortable and started being unforgivable. And it was also the moment I realized that silence, the thing I'd relied on for so long, was no longer protecting us. It had only given them room to go further. I didn't say anything yet. I didn't confront them. I didn't correct their assumptions. But I started preparing. Quietly. The weeks after that phone call were some of the heaviest I've ever lived through, not because anything exploded all at once, but because everything slowed down in a way that made the wait impossible to ignore. Lena and I didn't argue. That almost made it worse. We moved around each other carefully, like people navigating a cracked floor, both afraid that saying the wrong thing would cause something to collapse. She was angry at her parents, hurt by her sister, and exhausted from being pulled in opposite directions. I was quiet, not because I didn't feel anything, but because I felt too much to trust myself to speak without turning it into something irreversible. For the first time in our relationship, I started to feel like an outsider in my own marriage. Not because Lena pushed me away, but because the pressure around us kept trying to make me the problem that needed solving. Her parents stopped calling me entirely. Invitations came addressed to Lena alone. Family group chats went silent whenever I chimed in. When Lena confronted them, they insisted it wasn't intentional. "We just didn't want to make Omar uncomfortable," her mother said, as if my presence was the inconvenience. That kind of exclusion does something subtle to you. It doesn't make you angry right away. It makes you question yourself. I caught myself replaying conversations in my head, wondering if I should have explained my work more clearly earlier, if I should have pushed back harder, if I should have defended myself instead of letting things slide. There's a fine line between patience and self-erasure, and I realized I'd crossed it without noticing. Work, usually my anchor, started to feel distant. Not because it was failing, but because my focus was fractured. I found myself staring at screens without really seeing them, rereading the same lines, pushing tasks to later in the day. I was still delivering, still moving forward, but without the quiet satisfaction I used to feel. At night, when Lena fell asleep, I stayed awake longer than usual, listening to the steady rhythm of her breathing and wondering how something that started as a joke had turned into a slow, deliberate attempt to rewrite our lives. The lowest point came quietly, on an ordinary afternoon. Lena came home earlier than expected and sat down across from me at the kitchen table. She didn't cry this time. That scared me more than if she had. "They want to help with a down payment," she said. I didn't say anything right away. "My parents," she added. "They said it would make things easier for us. More secure." "And the conditions?" I asked. She hesitated. That was answer enough. "They want it in my name," she said finally. "Just mine. They said it's standard, that it protects me." I nodded slowly, even though my chest felt tight. "And what do you think?" "I think," she rubbed her temples. "I think they're using money to make a point. And I hate that it's working on me." That honesty broke something open between us. Not in a bad way. In a raw way. We talked for hours that night, not about numbers or plans, but about trust, about identity, about how easy it is for outside voices to creep into places they don't belong. Lena admitted that part of her felt embarrassed by the way her family talked about me, even though she knew it was unfair. I admitted that part of me felt ashamed for letting their opinions get under my skin, even though I knew my worth wasn't defined by their approval. "I don't want to be a project they're fixing," she said quietly. "And I don't want you to feel like you have to prove something just to be accepted." "I don't want to prove anything," I said. And in that moment, I realized it was true. What I wanted wasn't validation. It was peace. The next few months were quieter. Fewer family dinners. Fewer calls. Lena set boundaries that surprised even herself. She stopped answering questions that came wrapped in concern. She refused to discuss our finances. She corrected assumptions instead of smoothing them over. Her parents didn't like it. The distance grew. With that distance came grief, but also relief. Still, I wasn't myself yet. The constant tension had taken its toll. There were days I felt invisible, even in rooms where I was physically present. Days where the voice in my head sounded a little too much like my mother-in-law's, asking when I'd get a real job, questioning how long this could last, wondering if it was all just luck waiting to run out. So I did something I hadn't done in a long time. I stepped back and took inventory, not of my income or assets, but of myself. I started my mornings earlier. No emails, no messages, just quiet. I went for long walks, letting my thoughts wander without trying to control them. I wrote things down. Not plans, not strategies, just observations. What made me feel grounded? What drained me? What I'd been tolerating out of habit rather than choice. Slowly, almost without noticing, my focus returned. Work stopped feeling like an escape and started feeling like a craft again. I took on projects that excited me, not just ones that paid well. I turned down things that didn't align, something I'd avoided doing before out of a vague fear of scarcity. The irony wasn't lost on me. The more I trusted myself, the steadier everything became. There were small wins that I didn't share with anyone. A deal that closed smoothly. A long-term client who expanded their contract without being asked. A quiet sense of confidence that settled back into my shoulders. I didn't announce any of it. I didn't hint. I didn't correct anyone's assumptions. For the first time, that silence wasn't defensive. It was deliberate. Lena noticed the change before I did. "You seem lighter," she said one evening as we cooked dinner together. "I feel clearer," I replied. She smiled. "I like this version of us." The distance from her family remained, but it stopped feeling like a wound and started feeling like a boundary. We built routines that were ours. Weekend breakfasts, long conversations, plans that didn't need anyone else's approval. The noise faded. Then, just as things began to feel steady again, life tested that steadiness. Lena's father had a health scare. Nothing catastrophic, but serious enough to pull the family back into orbit around each other. Hospital visits, group messages, a sudden return to forced proximity. Lena asked me, carefully, if I was okay being around them again. "I'm fine," I said, and I meant it, though I didn't yet know what that would require of me. The first visit was tense, but civil. Her mother was polite, distant, almost overly formal. No jokes, no comments, just observation. She watched me the way someone watches a puzzle they haven't solved yet. Then, one afternoon, she asked Lena to step into the hallway to talk privately. I stayed behind in the room with her father, making small talk about weather and traffic, both of us avoiding the real subject like it was radioactive. When Lena came back, her face was tight. "She wants to apologize," Lena said quietly once we were alone later that evening. "For what?" I asked. "For pushing too hard," Lena replied. "But she also wants to understand where things stand." I almost laughed at that. Almost. A few days later, her mother invited us over for coffee. Just the three of us. No audience. No distractions. Lena asked if I wanted to go. "Yes," I said. Not because I needed closure, but because I felt ready. We sat in her living room, the same place where so many harmless jokes had been made. Her mother stirred her cup nervously before finally looking up at me. "I may have been unfair," she said. "I just want to know that my daughter is secure." "She is," I said evenly. She nodded. "I know you do well. I saw enough." There it was. The unspoken acknowledgement. "But," she continued, "numbers don't tell the whole story." I smiled slightly. "No, they don't." Something shifted then, not toward reconciliation, but toward truth. She wasn't apologizing to make peace. She was recalibrating, adjusting her understanding now that the old narrative no longer fit. And in that moment, I realized something important. This wasn't over. Not yet. The dynamic had changed, but the need to control hadn't disappeared. It had just gone quiet, waiting for another opening. I left that coffee knowing two things with certainty. First, that hitting rock bottom hadn't broken me. It had stripped away everything that didn't belong. Second, that the calm I'd rebuilt wasn't an ending. It was a foundation, and foundations exist for a reason. The apology didn't bring relief. It brought clarity. After that coffee, I stopped pretending that what we were dealing with was a misunderstanding. Misunderstandings dissolve when truth is shared. This didn't dissolve. It adapted. Lena's mother had adjusted her posture, not her instincts. She was still watching, still measuring, just with more caution now that she knew I wasn't as small or as fragile as she'd assumed. And that was when I understood something I should have seen earlier. People who equate worth with control don't back off when they're wrong. They change tactics. The weeks that followed were strangely calm. Lena's parents were polite again, inviting, even. Family dinners resumed, smaller than before, quieter. Her mother asked neutral questions about my work without prying too deeply. Her father nodded a little more when I spoke. On the surface, it looked like progress. Underneath, it felt like reconnaissance. I noticed the way her mother listened now, not just to my words, but to my silences. The way she filed things away. The way she circled back to topics weeks later, disguised as casual curiosity. I also noticed how often money came up indirectly. Property values, interest rates, retirement planning. Always framed as general conversation, never pointed, but always present. If I'd still been in the place I was months earlier, it might have rattled me. Instead, it sharpened my focus. I didn't rush into anything. Revenge, I've learned, doesn't start with action. It starts with patience. I began by tightening our circle, quietly, intentionally. Lena and I had long conversations about boundaries, about what we shared and what we didn't. We agreed, without drama, that our finances were no longer a topic for family discussion. We stopped correcting assumptions and started redirecting conversations entirely. Lena's confidence in those moments made me proud in a way I hadn't expected. She wasn't choosing sides anymore. She was choosing herself. At the same time, I reconnected with people I trusted outside of her family. Friends who knew me before I was the guy without a real job. People who understood my work because they lived in the same world. One of them, a longtime advisor I'd worked with on and off, helped me review everything with fresh eyes. Not because anything was wrong, but because I wanted to be precise. There's a difference between doing well and being unassailable. I consolidated, simplified, made certain things quieter and others more visible, but only to the people who needed to see them. I structured assets cleanly, made sure lines were clear, not out of fear, but out of intention. If anyone ever tried to pull Lena into a conversation about protection again, I wanted there to be no ambiguity about where we stood. Lena noticed, of course. She always does. "You're planning something," she said one night, not accusing, just observant. "I'm preparing," I replied. "For what?" I thought about it before answering. "For peace. On our terms." She nodded slowly. "Let me know how I can help." That was the moment I realized I didn't need allies. I already had the one that mattered. The opportunity presented itself sooner than I expected. Lena's parents decided to host a larger family gathering, something halfway between a dinner and a celebration. A milestone anniversary. Nothing flashy, but important to them. Invitations went out weeks in advance. This time, my name was included without hesitation. As Lena read the message aloud, I felt the familiar hum in my chest again. Not anxiety. Anticipation. "They want everyone there," she said. "Extended family, too." I smiled. Of course they do. Large gatherings were where her mother felt most comfortable. An audience gave her energy. It also gave her leverage. Subtle comments carried more weight when there were more ears to catch them. I suspected this wasn't just about celebrating an anniversary. It was about resetting the narrative in front of witnesses. I didn't decline. I didn't hesitate. I told Lena we'd go. In the weeks leading up to it, I watched carefully. Lena's sister started reaching out more. Casual check-ins. Questions about how we were doing. Comments about how tense things had felt lately. On the surface, it sounded like concern. Underneath, it felt like information gathering. Then came the call from Lena's aunt. She'd always been neutral, kind, but observant. She invited us for coffee a few days before the event, just the three of us. Halfway through, she leaned back in her chair and said, "Your mother-in-law has been talking." I didn't react. "About what?" Lena asked. "About you too," her aunt said gently. "About how things have been misunderstood. About how she worries she pushed too hard and wants to fix it." Lena frowned. "Fix it how?" Her aunt hesitated. "By reframing things. Publicly. She wants to make it clear that there are no hard feelings. That everyone's on the same page." I took a slow sip of my coffee. "And what page is that?" Her aunt met my eyes. "That you're doing fine. That she always knew you were capable. That any concerns she had were just motherly worry." There it was. The rewrite. After we left, Lena was quiet. "She wants to pretend none of it happened," she said finally. "She wants control of the ending," I replied. The day of the gathering arrived with perfect timing. Clear weather. Full house. Conversations overlapping in every corner of the room. Lena's parents were in their element. Her mother moved gracefully from group to group, laughing easily, touching arms, playing the role she'd perfected over decades. I stayed close to Lena, listening more than speaking. Watching. About halfway through the evening, her mother tapped a spoon against her glass. "I just want to say something," she announced, smiling broadly as the room quieted. "I'm so grateful to have everyone here. Family means everything to us." Murmurs of agreement. "And I want to say," she continued, glancing in our direction, "that I'm especially proud of how strong our family is. How we support each other, even when we don't always understand each other's paths." Her eyes flicked to me. Briefly, deliberately. I felt Lena's hand tighten around mine. "I've learned," her mother went on, "that success doesn't always look the same. And that sometimes, as parents, we worry too much." Soft laughter rippled through the room. "I'm proud of my daughter," she said, voice warm, "and the life she's building. and of the people she's chosen to build it with. All eyes turned to us. There it was. The reconciliation speech. Carefully crafted. Public. Designed to seal the story in her favor. I smiled politely. Nodded. Let the applause wash over us. Inside, I felt something settle into place. She thought this was the ending. The moment where everything reset and her authority was restored. Where the doubts were erased and replaced with gracious acceptance. She didn't realize she'd just handed me exactly what I needed. Because now, the narrative was public. And when narratives are public, they can be tested. I squeezed Lena's hand and leaned in, whispering something only she could hear. Her eyes widened slightly, then softened with understanding. What? She whispered back. Just trust me, I said. She nodded. Across the room, her mother was already moving on, basking in approval, confident the tension had finally been smoothed over. She had no idea that the moment she chose to speak for us was the moment she lost control of the conversation, and that the next time my work came up, it wouldn't be in whispers, jokes, or assumptions. It would be in facts, out loud, in front of everyone. But not yet. The moment arrived quietly, which felt appropriate. No dramatic entrance. No raised voice. Just a natural opening created by the very person who thought she was controlling the room. Dessert had been served. Conversations loosened. People stood in small clusters, plates balanced in their hands, the tension softened by sugar and wine. Lena's mother was near the center of it all, telling a story about a friend's son who had finally landed something stable after years of experimenting. She laughed as she said it, the word experimenting hanging in the air like a familiar echo. Someone glanced at me, then another. I felt Lena shift beside me, just slightly. Not nervous. Ready. I waited until the laughter faded and said, calmly, that's interesting. Stability means different things to different people. Her mother turned toward me, still smiling. Of course, she said lightly. That's exactly what I was saying earlier. I know, I replied. You were very clear. The room quieted in that subtle way it does when people sense a shift they can't quite name yet. One of Lena's cousins spoke up. Omar, didn't you say tax season was busy for you this year? Her mother's smile tightened just a fraction. Yes, I said. It was. And you're still consulting? Someone else asked. I nodded. Among other things. Lena's mother laughed softly. He's very modest, she said, trying to keep things breezy. You know how that kind of work can sound more impressive than it is. That was the opening. Not forced. Not dramatic. Offered. I smiled. You're right. Numbers can sound impressive out of context. Her eyes flicked to me, just for a moment. Something cautious passed through them. So maybe context helps, I continued. Especially since you mentioned earlier that you're proud of the life Lena and I are building. Lena squeezed my hand. Harder this time. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out a folded document. Nothing flashy. Just paper. I didn't wave it. I didn't hold it up. I simply unfolded it enough to glance down. This is my tax summary from last year, I said, still calm. The one that caused some confusion a few months ago. A few heads turned. A few people froze. I don't usually share this, I went on, because I don't believe income is a personality trait. But since my work has been such a recurring topic of concern, I thought clarity might be kinder than assumptions. Her mother opened her mouth, then closed it again. I won't read the number, I said. That's not necessary. What matters is this. Lena and I are secure. Not just comfortable. Secure. Our finances are shared, planned, and intentional. There is no risk she needs protecting from. No instability she needs rescuing from. And no future we haven't already prepared for. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was heavy. Someone cleared their throat. Someone else shifted their weight. Her mother finally spoke. Omar, that really isn't appropriate. I agree, I said gently. It would have been inappropriate if I brought it up unprompted. But it's been brought up for me. Repeatedly. Often in ways that question my role in this family. Her face flushed. That was never my intention. I know, I replied. And I meant it. Your intention was to feel reassured. To feel in control. But intention doesn't erase impact. Lena stepped forward then, her voice steady. What Omar is saying is what I've been trying to say for months. We are fine. We don't need fixing. And we don't need narratives written about us when we're not in the room. Her mother looked around, realizing too late that this wasn't a private conversation she could steer. Every ear was tuned in now. I was worried, she said weakly. Any mother would be. Worry becomes harmful, Lena said, when it turns into pressure, or manipulation, or trying to separate a couple instead of supporting them. That landed. Her sister stared at the floor. Her father looked tired, older somehow. Her aunt watched with a quiet kind of satisfaction, like someone seeing a truth finally acknowledged. I never tried to separate you, her mother said. Lena didn't raise her voice. You asked my sister to convince me to stay with you. You suggested separating finances. You excluded Omar from conversations about our future. That's not support. There was no applause, no gasps, just the slow realization spreading through the room that the story everyone had been fed was incomplete. I folded the paper and put it back in my pocket. This isn't about winning, I said. It's about boundaries. Going forward, our work, our money, and our decisions are not topics for discussion unless we bring them up ourselves. Her mother looked at me, truly looked at me, for the first time without the filter of assumption. I saw something break then. Not her pride, her certainty. The fallout wasn't explosive. It was quieter than that. Over the next few weeks, the family recalibrated. Lena's parents stopped offering advice disguised as concern. Invitations became neutral again, no longer weighted with implication. Some people apologized. Some avoided the subject entirely. Lena's sister admitted, privately, that she'd been uncomfortable for a long time but hadn't known how to push back. Her mother tried, once, to revisit the conversation. Not to argue, but to soften it. To explain herself again. I listened. I didn't debate. I simply said, we've moved forward. We expect you to meet us there. She nodded. Slowly. The real revenge wasn't the moment at the party. It was everything that came after. It was Lena standing taller in every room. It was the end of whispered concerns and backchannel conversations. It was the quiet understanding that I didn't need their approval to belong. I already did, on my own terms. Months later, we bought a house. In both our names. Without help. Without commentary. Lena's parents found out after the paperwork was signed. Her mother congratulated us, politely, carefully. She never asked how we afforded it. That suited me just fine. I learned something important through all of this. Silence is powerful, but only when it's chosen. When it's used to protect peace, not avoid conflict. I didn't need to prove my worth. I needed to stop letting others define it. And the next time someone laughed and asked when I get a real job, I smiled and realized I already had one. Living a real life.